The fluorescent lights of the Denver Police Department's Victim Services Office cast harsh shadows across 7-year-old Sophie Carter's pale face as she sat motionless in an oversized chair that seemed to swallow her tiny frame. Her bright blue eyes, once sparkling with the innocent joy that made her the sunshine of Maple Street Elementary, now stared blankly at the beige wall, vacant and haunting in a way that made even the most seasoned detectives look away. Those eyes had seen things no child should ever witness, and the weight of that knowledge seemed to press down on her small shoulders like an invisible boulder. 3 weeks and 4 days had passed since that horrific October night when masked intruders had shattered the peaceful suburban tranquility of the Carter family's 2-story colonial home on Elmwood Drive. The attack had been swift, brutal, and methodical, nothing like the random break-ins that occasionally plagued Denver's outer neighborhoods. These weren't desperate drug addicts looking for quick cash or teenagers seeking thrills. The evidence suggested something far more sinister. A coordinated assault that left Sophie's father, Robert Carter, a respected high school history teacher, fighting for his life in a medically induced coma at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. Her mother, Linda, a pediatric nurse beloved by families throughout the community, remained in intensive care with multiple fractures and severe head trauma that doctors weren't sure she would fully recover from. Detective Maria Santos, a 15-year veteran of the Denver PD with kind eyes and graying temples, had interviewed hundreds of child witnesses throughout her career. She'd developed a reputation for her gentle approach and uncanny ability to help traumatized children open up about their experiences. But Sophie's complete silence was unlike anything she'd encountered in her professional life. The little girl clutched a worn stuffed elephant named Peanuts, a gift from her grandmother who had passed away the previous year, rocking back and forth in an almost rhythmic motion whenever anyone approached her chair. The elephant's once bright purple fabric had faded to a soft lavender, and its trunk bore the gentle wear marks of countless bedtime hugs and whispered secrets. The medical team at Children's Hospital had conducted thorough examinations, finding no physical injuries on Sophie beyond a few minor scratches and bruises. Dr. Patricia Wells, the chief pediatric psychologist, explained that Sophie was experiencing severe psychological trauma that had effectively rendered her mute. "It's not uncommon," Dr. Wells had told Detective Santos during their consultation. "When children witness extreme violence, especially against their parents, their minds sometimes shut down as a protective mechanism. She's not choosing to stay silent. Her brain is protecting her from reliving the trauma by blocking her ability to verbalize what she experienced." With no witnesses and minimal physical evidence, the case was growing cold faster than Detective Santos cared to admit. The crime scene had been thoroughly processed by the forensics team, but the perpetrators had been careful. They'd worn gloves, masks, and shoe covers, leaving behind only a few partial footprints and some disturbed soil near the basement window that appeared to be their point of entry. The house's security cameras had been disabled before the attack, and neighboring properties had provided no useful footage due to the strategic positioning of tall hedges and mature oak trees that lined the Carter's property. The entire community of Thornfield, the quiet suburban neighborhood where the Carters lived, was in a state of panic. Parents were installing additional security systems. Children were no longer allowed to play outside after dark, and the local hardware store had sold out of deadbolts and motion sensor lights. The attack on the Carter family, well-known and loved members of the community, had shattered everyone's sense of safety. Robert coached Little League baseball in the summers and organized neighborhood barbecues. Linda had delivered half the babies in Thornfield and was the go-to person whenever someone needed a casserole during difficult times. Detective Santos found herself spending more and more time in that sterile room with Sophie, hoping for any sign of breakthrough. She'd tried drawing exercises, having Sophie point to pictures, even brought in a child psychiatrist who who specialized in nonverbal communication techniques. Nothing worked. Sophie would occasionally look up when someone entered the room, but her gaze would quickly return to that same spot on the wall, as if she was seeing something there that no one else could perceive. The pressure from Captain Rodriguez was mounting daily. The media had picked up the story, dubbing it the Elmwood Horror, and reporters called constantly seeking updates. The mayor's office wanted answers. The community was demanding justice. But how could they solve a case when their only witness couldn't or wouldn't speak? Late at night, when Detective Santos sat in her own quiet apartment, reviewing the case files for the 100th time, she couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie held all the answers. The little girl had been in the house during the entire attack. She'd somehow avoided detection by the perpetrators. She was their key to everything, but she was locked away behind walls of trauma that seemed impenetrable. Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the University of Colorado's Child Psychology Department had suggested that Sophie might respond better to alternative therapeutic approaches. Traditional interview techniques assume that the child can and will verbalize their experiences, Dr. Mitchell explained during a consultation. But Sophie's trauma may require something more innovative, something that allows her to communicate, without forcing her to relive the experience through words. As Detective Santos sat across from Sophie on that gray November afternoon, watching the little girl's gentle movements as she stroked her elephant's worn fabric, she couldn't help but wonder if justice would ever be served for the Carter family. Somewhere in Denver, the monsters who had destroyed this innocent family were walking free, possibly planning their next attack. And the only person who could identify them sat 3 feet away, trapped in her own protective silence, holding secrets. That could change everything, if only someone could find a way to unlock them. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 5 p.m., marking another day without progress. Another day that Robert and Linda Carter remained in the hospital, and another day that their attackers remained free to strike again. Detective Santos gathered her files with a heavy heart, knowing she'd be back tomorrow to sit in this same chair, hoping for a miracle that seemed increasingly unlikely to come. But sometimes miracles come in the most unexpected forms. Dr. James Mitchell had seen his share of broken children during his 23 years as Denver's leading child trauma psychologist, but the case files spread across his mahogany desk on that cold November morning made his stomach tighten with familiar dread. Sophie Carter's photograph stared back at him, a school picture taken just 2 months before the attack, showing a gap-toothed smile and pigtails tied with bright yellow ribbons. The contrast between that joyful image and Detective Santos's detailed report of the child's current catatonic state was heartbreaking. Dr. Mitchell leaned back in his leather chair, his graying beard catching the morning light streaming through his office window on the 3rd floor of Denver Children's Hospital. He'd been consulted on dozens of cases involving traumatized children, but something about Sophie's complete withdrawal troubled him deeply. Traditional therapy techniques had failed spectacularly. Play therapy, art therapy, even hypnotherapy had yielded nothing but deeper silence. The child was locked in a prison of her own mind, and Dr. Mitchell feared that without intervention soon, she might never emerge. "There is one approach we haven't tried," Dr. Mitchell had told Detective Santos during their phone conversation the previous evening. His voice carried a mixture of hope and uncertainty that made the seasoned detective sit up straighter in her patrol car. "It's unconventional, and some of my colleagues think it's too experimental for such a serious case. But I've seen remarkable results with severely traumatized children." That approach had a name: Zeus, a 3-year-old golden retriever whose gentle brown eyes and impossibly soft coat had worked magic with children across Colorado who had been too damaged by their experiences to trust human adults. Zeus wasn't just any therapy dog. He was part of an elite program developed by the Colorado Canine Therapy Institute. specially trained to work with the most challenging cases of childhood trauma. Dr. Mitchell remembered the first time he'd met Zeus 18 months earlier. The dog had been brought to evaluate a 6-year-old girl who'd been rescued from a trafficking ring and hadn't spoken in 8 months. Within minutes of Zeus entering the room, the child had whispered her first words, "Pretty dog." That breakthrough had led to a full recovery and the successful prosecution of her captors. Since then, Zeus had worked with over 40 children, each case more challenging than the last. But Zeus's handler and trainer, Sarah Williams, had initial reservations about the Sophie Carter case. A former Marine dog trainer who transitioned to therapeutic work after her own struggles with PTSD, Sarah understood trauma in ways that most people couldn't fathom. "This isn't just about getting a child to talk," she explained to Dr. Mitchell over coffee at a small cafe near the hospital. "This is about a potential homicide case where every word Sophie says could mean the difference between justice and letting killers walk free. That's enormous pressure for a 7-year-old, and Zeus will sense that tension immediately." Zeus himself seemed to understand the gravity of his work. Unlike typical golden retrievers, who bounded with endless energy, Zeus carried himself with an almost human-like awareness of his surroundings. His training had taught him to read the subtle signs of human distress: elevated heart rates, shallow breathing, the specific body language of trauma victims. He'd learned to approach slowly, to position himself at just the right angle to provide comfort without feeling threatening, and most importantly, to remain absolutely calm even when the children he worked with experienced emotional breakdowns. The morning of Sophie's first session with Zeus, Dr. Mitchell found himself more nervous than he'd been in years. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing every detail of the case, consulting with colleagues across the country who'd worked with therapy dogs in criminal investigations. The legal implications were staggering. If Zeus could help Sophie remember details about her parents' attackers, those memories could be the key to solving Denver's most high-profile violent crime of the year. Detective Santos arrived at the hospital at exactly 9 o'clock, her usually steady hands trembling slightly as she signed the visitor registry. She'd barely slept the night before, alternating between hope and skepticism about this unconventional approach. Her captain had been dubious. The district attorney's office was concerned about the admissibility of any testimony that resulted from dog therapy, and the media was already sniffing around the story. But conventional methods had failed completely, and Sophie's parents were running out of time. The therapy room had been specially prepared for Zeus's visit. The harsh fluorescent lights had been replaced with warm, soft lighting that mimicked natural sunlight. Comfortable cushions and blankets were arranged on the floor, creating an environment that felt more like a cozy living room than a sterile medical facility. Dr. Mitchell had learned that the physical environment was crucial to Zeus's effectiveness. The dog performed best in spaces that felt safe and homelike. When Sarah Williams opened the door and Zeus padded quietly into the room, something shifted in the atmosphere immediately. The golden retriever moved with purpose, but without urgency, his intelligent eyes taking in every detail of the space. Before focusing on the small figure huddled in the corner chair, Sophie, clutching her worn elephant peanuts, looked up for the first time in days. Her vacant stare seemed to sharpen slightly as Zeus approached, moving so slowly and deliberately that even Dr. Mitchell found himself holding his breath. Zeus stopped exactly 3 feet from Sophie's chair, close enough for her to reach out if she chose, but far enough away that she wouldn't feel cornered or threatened. He lowered himself to the floor in a graceful movement, resting his golden head on his front paws while keeping his gentle brown eyes fixed on Sophie's face. The room fell silent, except for the soft sound of Zeus's breathing and the distant hum of hospital machinery in the corridors beyond. For several minutes, nothing happened. Sophie stared at Zeus, and Zeus stared back with infinite patience. Detective Santos shifted in her observation chair, fighting the urge to break the silence. Dr. Mitchell made careful notes, documenting every micro-expression on Sophie's face, every subtle change in her posture. Then, almost imperceptibly, Sophie's grip on her elephant began to loosen. Her rigid shoulders relaxed by perhaps an inch. Her breathing, which had been shallow and rapid for weeks, seemed to slow and deepen. Zeus, sensing the change, made a soft sound, not quite a whine, but a gentle vocalization that somehow conveyed both sympathy and encouragement. Sophie's right hand, small and pale from weeks of hospital stays and sleepless nights, began to move. Slowly, tentatively, she extended her fingers toward Zeus. The golden retriever remained perfectly still, allowing her to make the choice to control the pace of their introduction. When her fingertips finally brushed against his soft fur, Sophie Carter spoke her first words in 3 weeks and 4 days. "He's beautiful," she whispered, her voice so soft that Dr. Mitchell had to strain to hear it. But those 2 words rang through the therapy room like a symphony, carrying with them the first real hope that justice might be possible for the Carter family. Detective Santos felt her heart skip a beat as tears welled in her eyes. Zeus seemed to understand the significance of the moment, his tail giving the softest wag as Sophie's hand settled more confidently into his fur. Dr. Mitchell carefully documented the time, 10:47 a.m., knowing that this moment might someday be referenced in a courtroom as the beginning of Sophie Carter's journey back to the world of the living. But this was just the beginning. Could this gentle giant truly be the key to solving Denver's most shocking home invasion case? Only time would tell, but for the first time in weeks, hope filled that small therapy room like golden sunlight breaking through storm clouds. By their 3rd session together, the sterile therapy room at Denver Children's Hospital had transformed into something resembling a child's sanctuary. Sophie Carter sat cross-legged on a pile of soft cushions, her fingers weaving through Zeus's golden fur with a familiarity that had developed over 6 days of careful bonding. The worn elephant Peanuts now sat propped against Zeus's side, as if the stuffed animal had found a new protector. Dr. Mitchell observed from his usual spot near the window, his notebook balanced on his knee, pen poised to capture every nuance of their interaction. What had begun as tentative whispers had evolved into a steady stream of quiet conversation between Sophie and Zeus. She told him about her favorite cartoons, her best friend Emma from school, and how much she missed her parents' bedtime stories. But Dr. Mitchell noticed that whenever the conversation veered toward anything related to home or that October night, Sophie would fall silent, burying her face deeper into Zeus's neck until the moment passed. Sarah Williams, Zeus's handler, had positioned herself strategically across the room, close enough to monitor her partner, but far enough away to remain unobtrusive. She watched Zeus's body language with the trained eye of someone who understood. But the dog often sensed breakthrough moments before the humans in the room did. Today, something felt different. Zeus's ears were more alert, his breathing slightly more rapid, as if he sensed that Sophie was approaching some invisible threshold. "Zeus," Sophie whispered, her voice carrying a tremor that made Dr. Mitchell look up from his notes. "I need to tell you something scary." The room seemed to hold its breath. Detective Santos, who had been observing from behind the 2-way mirror in an adjacent room, leaned forward instinctively. After weeks of gentle, coaxing and patient waiting, were they finally approaching the breakthrough they desperately needed? Zeus responded with a soft huff, a sound Sarah had trained him to make when children needed encouragement to continue talking. It was a perfectly timed response that seemed to give Sophie the courage she needed to continue. Her small hand gripped Zeus's fur more tightly, and she leaned close to his ear, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There weren't just bad men, Zeus. There were 3 of them." Dr. Mitchell's pen froze mid-sentence. 3 perpetrators. This was the first concrete detail Sophie had revealed about the attack, and it contradicted the police's working theory that they were looking for a single intruder, or at most a pair of criminals. Sophie continued, her words flowing more freely. Now as she spoke directly into Zeus's attentive ear. They came through the basement window that Daddy always told me to keep locked. But I forgot that day because I was playing down there with my Legos. The guilt in her 7-year-old voice was heartbreaking, and Dr. Mitchell made a note to address this misplaced self-blame in future sessions. But what Sophie revealed next made Dr. Mitchell's blood run cold and sent Detective Santos scrambling for her radio. I wasn't in my bedroom like I told the first policeman, Sophie whispered to Zeus, her words barely audible, even in the quiet room. I was hiding in Mommy and Daddy's closet because I heard the scary noises and I wanted to find them. But they were already downstairs with the bad men. The implication hit Dr. Mitchell like a physical blow. Sophie hadn't been safely tucked away in her bedroom during the attack as everyone had assumed. She'd been in her parents' bedroom closet, which, according to the police reports he'd studied, had a direct view of the main living area where the assault had taken place. This child had witnessed the entire attack. Sophie's revelations continued to pour out in hushed tones that only Zeus seemed able to coax from her wounded soul. She described details that made Dr. Mitchell's hands shake as he wrote, how the tallest man had limped slightly on his left leg, how another had worn a distinctive leather jacket that squeaked when he moved, how the third man had kept checking his phone throughout the attack, the bright screen illuminating part of his face despite the mask. The one with the squeaky jacket had tattoos on his hands. Zeus, Sophie whispered, her voice gaining strength as she shared her burden with her. Golden confidant. Snake tattoos that moved when he hurt Daddy, and his voice was really deep and scary when he told the others to hurry up. Dr. Mitchell's clinical training warred with his human emotions as he documented these horrific details. This brave little girl had witnessed her parents' brutal assault and had somehow possessed the presence of mind to observe and remember crucial identifying details. But every time Detective Santos or other adults had tried to ask her directly about that night, she'd retreated into protective silence. The session continued for another 20 minutes, with Sophie revealing more pieces of the puzzle that had consumed the Denver Police Department for nearly a month. She described hearing one of the men call another Tommy, witnessed them searching specifically for something in her father's home office, and most importantly, revealed that during a brief moment when her mother had fought back and turned on the living room lights, she'd gotten a clear view of one attacker's face when his mask had been partially pulled away. He looked familiar, Zeus, Sophie said, her small voice carrying a weight far beyond her years. Like someone from the neighborhood. But I can't remember who. It's all fuzzy and scary in my head. Dr. Mitchell realized they were approaching a critical juncture. Sophie had revealed enough information to potentially break the case wide open, but asking her to recall the man's identity might push her back into silence. The decision of how to proceed would require careful coordination with Detective Santos and the district attorney's office. As the session drew to a close, Sophie curled up against Zeus's side, emotionally exhausted from sharing the secrets that had been trapped inside her for so long. Am I in trouble for hiding instead of helping Mommy and Daddy? She asked Zeus, tears streaming down her cheeks. Zeus responded by gently licking her hand, a gesture that Sarah had trained him to use for comfort during moments of intense emotional distress. A simple action seemed to provide Sophie with the reassurance she needed. Dr. Mitchell carefully closed his notebook, his mind already racing through the implications of what they'd learned. 3 perpetrators, distinctive physical characteristics, a possible neighborhood connection, and most critically, a child witness who had seen far more than anyone had realized. But getting Sophie to testify in court would require navigating unprecedented legal territory. As Detective Santos entered the therapy room to check on Sophie, Dr. Mitchell pulled her aside. "We need to talk," he whispered urgently. "What Sophie just told Zeus could solve this case, but it's going to require a legal decision that's never been made before in Colorado." The breakthrough everyone had been hoping for was finally happening, but it would take Zeus and an entire legal system willing to think outside the box to ensure that Sophie's courage could deliver the justice her family deserved. The question was no longer whether Sophie could remember. It was whether the courts would allow her to tell her story in the only way she could, with Zeus by her side. The mahogany-paneled chambers of the Honorable Judge Rebecca Thompson had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. On a gray December morning, 6 weeks after Sophie Carter's breakthrough with Zeus, the most powerful legal minds in Colorado sat around the judge's conference table, debating a request that could revolutionize courtroom procedure forever. District Attorney Michael Rodriguez spread case files across the polished surface, while Defense Attorney Patricia Hartwell furiously typed notes on her laptop. Dr. Mitchell sat quietly in the corner, Zeus lying calmly at his feet, seemingly oblivious to the historic nature of the discussion swirling around him. Judge Thompson, a 48-year-old jurist with steel-gray hair and penetrating blue eyes, had presided over thousands of cases during her 15 years on the bench. She'd seen everything from high-profile murder trials to complex white-collar fraud cases, but nothing had prepared her for the prosecution's unprecedented request: permission to bring a therapy dog into her courtroom during the testimony of their key witness. "Your Honor," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the weight of a case that had consumed the Denver legal community for 2 months. "We're not asking for this lightly. Sophie Carter is our only eyewitness to a brutal home invasion that left 2 respected members of our community fighting for their lives. Without her testimony, 3 violent criminals will walk free to potentially strike again." The media frenzy outside the courthouse had reached fever pitch since word of the unusual request had leaked 3 days earlier. CNN legal analysts debated the precedent-setting implications on national television. The Denver Post had run a front-page editorial titled, "Justice or Circus?" Local talk radio buzzed with callers arguing both sides. Protesters had gathered on the courthouse step, some carrying signs reading, "Let Sophie speak," while others declared courts are for humans, not dogs. Defense Attorney Hartwell leaned forward, her expression stern. "Your Honor, this is nothing more than an elaborate attempt to manipulate the jury's emotions. The prosecution wants to parade a cute dog in front of 12 jurors to generate sympathy for their witness. It's prejudicial, it's unprecedented, and it turns our courtroom into a theatrical production." Judge Thompson had spent the previous 3 weeks researching every legal precedent she could find. Her law clerk had compiled cases from 47 states, analyzing instances where animals had been present during court proceedings. The results were mixed at best. A handful of states had allowed therapy dogs during testimony from child victims of sexual abuse, but never in a case involving potential homicide charges. The legal landscape was largely uncharted territory. "Dr. Mitchell," Judge Thompson addressed, the child psychologist directly, "explain to me exactly why traditional methods of helping Sophie testify work. Dr. Mitchell adjusted his glasses and consulted his thick folder of documentation. "Your Honor, Sophie Carter suffers from what we clinically term selective mutism triggered by severe trauma. She can speak, we know this, because she communicates freely with Zeus, but she cannot verbalize her experiences when directly questioned by adults about the attack. Every attempt to conduct a traditional interview has resulted in complete shutdown. Zeus isn't just a comfort object. He's become Sophie's conduit for processing and expressing traumatic memories." The defense attorney's objections came rapid fire. "Your Honor, there are no established protocols for this. How do we cross-examine a child who's whispering to us, 'Dog, How do we ensure the accuracy of her statements? What happens if the dog becomes distracted or disruptive? This sets a dangerous precedent that could turn every courtroom in America into a petting zoo. Judge Thompson's own research had uncovered similar concerns raised by legal scholars across the country. The Colorado Bar Association had filed a formal brief questioning the admissibility of testimony given under such unconventional circumstances. The state's Victim Rights Coalition, however, had submitted an equally passionate argument supporting Sophie's right to testify in whatever manner allowed her be heard. Sarah Williams, Zeus's handler, had been remarkably quiet throughout the proceedings, but Judge Thompson turned to her now. Ms. Williams, you've worked with Zeus in therapeutic settings for 3 years. Can you guarantee his behavior in a courtroom environment? Sarah straightened, her military background evident in her posture. Your Honor, Zeus has been specifically trained for high-stress environments. He's worked in hospitals during medical emergencies, in schools during crisis interventions, and in police stations during difficult interviews. His training includes exposure to large crowds, raised voices, and emotional outbursts. He will not bark, whine, or display any disruptive behavior. His sole focus will be providing emotional support to Sophie. The technical challenges were staggering. Court reporters would need special equipment to capture Sophie's whispered words. The jury would require education about trauma responses in children. The witness stand itself would need modification to accommodate both a 7-year-old and a 70-pound golden retriever. Every aspect of traditional courtroom procedure would require adaptation. Judge Thompson had also consulted with legal experts from around the world. A prosecutor from the Netherlands had successfully used therapy animals in child testimony cases. Several Scandinavian countries had established protocols for accommodating therapeutic support during criminal proceedings. But American jurisprudence remained largely resistant to such innovations. The victims' families had submitted heart-wrenching letters to the court. Robert Carter, now conscious but still recovering from severe head trauma, had written in shaky handwriting, "Please give my daughter whatever she needs to find her voice. Those men destroyed our family, and only Sophie can make sure they don't destroy others." After 2 hours of heated discussion, Judge Thompson called for a 15-minute recess. Alone in her chambers, she stared out the window at the protesters below, understanding that her decision would likely be appealed regardless of which way she ruled. The case law was sparse, the precedent unclear, but the stakes couldn't be higher. When court reconvened, Judge Thompson's voice carried the gravity of someone making history. This court has wrestled with balancing the rights of the accused against the rights of victims, particularly child victims of violent crime. After careful consideration of all arguments and extensive research into similar cases nationwide, I am prepared to make a ruling that I believe serves the interests of justice. The courtroom fell silent. Sophie's grandmother, who had been her guardian since the attack, clutched her rosary beads. Detective Santos held her breath. Even Zeus seemed to sense the importance of the moment, his intelligent eyes fixed on the judge. The motion to allow Zeus to accompany Sophie Carter during her testimony is granted, with strict conditions. The prosecution team exchanged victorious glances, while the defense attorney immediately began preparing appeal paperwork. This court will implement unprecedented security measures and protocols to ensure that the presence of Zeus enhances rather than prejudices these proceedings. Judge Thompson's decision sent shockwaves through the legal community within minutes. Social media exploded with reactions. Legal scholars on television declared it either a historic moment for victims' rights or a dangerous erosion of judicial standards. But in a small therapy room at Children's Hospital, a 7-year-old girl continued practicing her testimony with her golden retriever companion, unaware that their bond was about to change American jurisprudence forever. The revolution had begun. And Sophie Carter and Zeus were about to walk into a courtroom where justice would be redefined by courage, compassion, and an unprecedented partnership between a traumatized child and her four-legged guardian angel. The Denver County Courthouse had never seen anything like the media circus that descended upon it on the morning of January 15th. News vans from every major network lined Colfax Avenue, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like modern prayer, wheels seeking divine transmission. Inside the courthouse, Courtroom 4A had been transformed beyond recognition. A specially constructed platform extended from the witness stand, upholstered in soft blue fabric to accommodate both a 7-year-old girl and a 70-pound golden retriever. Sound technicians had installed ultra-sensitive microphones capable of capturing the faintest whisper, while court reporters sat poised with specialized equipment designed to transcribe even the most delicate testimony. Judge Rebecca Thompson surveyed her courtroom from the bench, noting the unusual tension that crackled through the air like electricity before a storm. The gallery was packed to capacity with an unusual mix of spectators, legal scholars who had flown in from across the country to witness history, child advocacy experts, members of the Denver community who had followed the Carter family's story, and journalists whose editors had deemed this the most important courtroom story of the decade. A jury of 12 Denver residents, 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 28 to 67, had been extensively questioned during voir dire about their feelings toward animals and their ability to focus on testimony despite the unusual circumstances. Jury selection had taken 3 full days, with both sides exercising challenges over potential jurors' emotional responses to the prospect of a child testifying with a therapy dog. Defense attorney Patricia Hartwell sat at the defendant's table with her 3 clients, their faces masks of controlled anxiety. Marcus Webb, 34, a former construction worker with multiple prior arrests, sat between Tommy Martinez, 28, whose snake tattoos were now covered by a conservative suit jacket, and Jake Rodriguez, 31, whose slight limp had been noted by several court observers during pretrial hearings. All 3 men had maintained their innocence throughout the proceedings, claiming they were together at a bar during the time of the attack, an alibi that had crumbled when bar security footage showed them leaving 90 minutes before the assault occurred. District Attorney Michael Rodriguez straightened his tie and checked his notes one final time. Everything hinged on the next hour. Sophie Carter's testimony could either secure convictions for 3 violent criminals or result in their acquittal. If the jury found her unusual method of testifying too unreliable or emotionally manipulative. At exactly 9:30 a.m., the courtroom's side door opened and a hush fell over the packed gallery. Sophie Carter entered holding the hand of her grandmother, Elena Martinez, her small figure dwarfed by the formal surroundings. She wore a simple purple dress, her favorite color, with white tights and black Mary Jane shoes that clicked softly against the marble floor. Her long brown hair had been braided with care, decorated with a small butterfly clip that caught the morning light streaming through the courthouse's tall windows. But all eyes immediately shifted to the magnificent golden retriever who padded silently beside her. Zeus wore his official therapy dog vest, a royal blue garment with courthouse therapy dog emblazoned in white letters across his chest. His calm demeanor and focused attention on Sophie provided a striking contrast to the nervous energy radiating from everyone else in the room. Sarah Williams, Zeus's handler, followed closely behind, carrying a small bag containing water, treats, and comfort items in case Zeus needed them during the proceedings. Her own tension was barely concealed beneath her professional composure. She had trained Zeus for many challenging situations, but nothing quite like this. Judge Thompson's voice carried clearly through the enhanced sound system as she addressed the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are about to witness testimony unlike any that has been given in an American courtroom. I want to remind you that your duty is to focus on the substance of the witness's words, not the unusual manner in which they are delivered. The specially constructed platform worked perfectly as Sophie climbed carefully onto the witness stand, Zeus settling beside her with practiced grace. The microphones immediately picked up Sophie's quiet breathing and the soft thump of Zeus's tail against the padded surface. Sophie's small hand immediately found Zeus's fur, her fingers weaving through the golden strands with the familiarity born of months of bonding. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh approached the witness stand with the careful movements of someone approaching a frightened animal. Her voice was gentle but clear enough to carry throughout the courtroom. "Good morning, Sophie. Can you tell us your name?" Sophie's eyes remained fixed on Zeus as she whispered, "Sophie Elena Carter." Her voice was so soft that several jurors leaned forward in their seats, straining to hear despite the amplification system. "How old are you, Sophie?" 7 3/4. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips as she shared this detail with Zeus, her hand never leaving his fur. The questioning continued with basic background information: Sophie's school, her parents' names, her favorite subjects. Each answer came as a whisper directed to Zeus, but the microphones captured every word with crystal clarity. The jury watched with fascination as this brave little girl found her voice through her four-legged companion. Defense Attorney Hartwell rose from her seat. "Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution is leading the witness and creating an artificial rapport for the jury's benefit." Judge Thompson's response was firm. "Overruled? The court has already established the parameters for this testimony. Counsel will refrain from interrupting unless there is a legitimate legal objection." As the questions grew more serious, approaching the events of that terrible October night, Sophie's grip on Zeus's fur tightened visibly. Her breathing became shallower, and several jurors noticed her small body beginning to tremble. Zeus, sensing her distress, shifted slightly closer, providing more contact and comfort. "Sophie," Prosecutor Walsh continued gently, "I need to ask you about the night when the bad men came to your house. Can you tell Zeus what happened that night?" The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Even the court reporters seemed to hold their breath as they waited for Sophie's response. The little girl leaned down until her face was buried in Zeus's neck, her whispered words barely audible despite the sensitive equipment. "Zeus," she breathed, her voice carrying the weight of months of suppressed trauma. "That night was the scariest night of my whole life." Several jurors visibly held back tears as Sophie began to recount the events that had shattered her family and terrorized her community. But her words, spoken to Zeus with growing strength and clarity, would soon reveal details that would shock everyone in that historic courtroom and change the course of American legal history forever. The moment of truth had finally arrived, and a golden retriever named Zeus was about to help deliver justice in the most extraordinary way imaginable. Sophie Carter's voice grew stronger as she continued whispering to Zeus, each word captured with crystal clarity by the sophisticated microphone system and transmitted throughout the hushed courtroom. Her small hands remained buried in the golden retriever's fur as she recounted details that made seasoned detectives shift uncomfortably in their seats and caused several jurors to lean forward with intense concentration. "Zeus," Sophie whispered, her voice gaining confidence as she shared her burden with her faithful companion. "I remember the tall man walked funny, like his leg was hurt. He kept rubbing it and making angry sounds when he had to bend down." At the defense table, Jake Rodriguez instinctively touched his left leg, the same leg he'd injured in a construction accident 3 years earlier, a fact that was documented in his workers' compensation file, but had never been connected to the Carter case. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh maintained her gentle approach, allowing Sophie to reveal details at her own pace. "Can you tell Zeus what the men were looking for in your house, Sophie?" The little girl's brow furrowed as she concentrated, her fingers working through Zeus's coat in a soothing rhythm. They kept saying they needed to find the box, Zeus, the special box that Daddy kept in his office. They got really mad when they couldn't find it and started throwing papers everywhere. This revelation sent District Attorney Rodriguez scrambling. Through his case files, no special box had been mentioned in any previous investigation, and Robert Carter had never indicated he possessed anything of particular value that might motivate such a violent break-in. Defense Attorney Patricia Hartwell rose from her seat, her voice sharp with objection. Your Honor, this testimony is becoming increasingly specific in ways that seem coached or suggested. We object to the leading nature of these revelations. Judge Thompson's response was measured but firm. The witness is responding to open-ended questions in her own words. The objection is overruled, but I caution the prosecution to maintain the established protocol. Sophie continued her testimony, oblivious to the legal maneuvering around her. Her focus remained entirely on Zeus, who seemed to sense the importance of each word and maintained perfect stillness despite the growing tension in the courtroom. The man with the squeaky jacket smelled like the cigarettes that make me sneeze. Zeus. And he had green ink on his fingers, like he'd been writing with a marker. Detective Maria Santos, sitting in the gallery, felt her pulse quicken. Marcus. Webb worked part-time at a printing company where green ink was used extensively for marking inventory sheets. It was a detail so specific and unusual that it couldn't be coincidental. As Sophie's testimony progressed, her descriptions became increasingly vivid and damaging to the defendants. She described Tommy Martinez's distinctive laugh, a high-pitched giggle that several of his former coworkers would later confirm was his trademark nervous response. She recounted Jake Rodriguez's habit of cracking his knuckles before doing anything physical, a detail that would match security footage from 3 previous burglaries the police hadn't connected to this case. But it was Sophie's next revelation. That would change everything in the courtroom and beyond. Zeus, Sophie said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. When Mommy fought back and turned on the lights, I saw one of the bad men's face when his mask got pulled. The courtroom collectively held its breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The potential identification that could seal the defendant's fate. Sophie leaned closer to Zeus, her small body trembling slightly as she approached the most difficult part of her testimony. He looked just like the man who sells groceries at Peterson's Market. Zeus, the one who always gives me extra stickers when Mommy buys cereal. The words hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds before chaos erupted. At a table in the gallery's 3rd row, David Peterson, a 42-year-old grocery store manager who had attended every day of the trial as a concerned community member, suddenly stood up, his face draining of all color. His eyes darted toward the courtroom exits as the full implication of Sophie's words sank in throughout the room. Peterson had been the perfect neighbor, the concerned citizen who had organized meal trains for the Carter family, who had visited Robert in the hospital, who had even contributed to the reward fund for information leading to the attacker's arrest. His presence at the trial had seemed like simple civic duty. No one had questioned why a grocery store manager would spend his days listening to testimony about a crime that didn't directly affect him. Detective Santos was the first to react, her training kicking in as she noticed Peterson's suspicious behavior. But Peterson was already moving, pushing past seated spectators toward the courtroom's main exit. His sudden flight was the most damning confession possible. An innocent man would have stayed to clear his name, not bolted like a guilty criminal caught in the act. "Stop him!" Detective Santos shouted, but Peterson had a head start and desperation on his side. He shoved through the courtroom doors and into the marble-floored hallway beyond, his dress shoes slipping on the polished surface as he ran toward the main lobby. Judge Thompson's gavel came down like thunder. "Bailiffs, secure that man immediately. Court is in recess." The usually orderly courtroom erupted into controlled chaos as law, Enforcement officers poured from their positions throughout the building. Zeus, sensing Sophie's distress as the courtroom exploded around them, gently nuzzled her hand and made the soft whuffing sound that always comforted her. Even in the midst of the most dramatic moment in Colorado legal history, the therapy dog remained focused on his primary mission, keeping Sophie calm and safe. Peterson's flight lasted exactly 47 seconds. He made it halfway across the courthouse lobby before two bailiffs tackled him near the metal detectors, his expensive suit jacket tearing as he crashed to the floor. His desperate escape attempt was witnessed by dozens of reporters and captured by multiple news cameras that had been stationed outside the courtroom. Within minutes, Peterson was handcuffed and placed under arrest while Sophie, still whispering to Zeus on the witness stand, asked in her small voice, "Did I do something wrong, Zeus? Why is everyone yelling?" The golden retriever responded by placing his head gently on her lap, a gesture that perfectly captured the surreal nature of the moment. A child's innocent revelation, delivered through her therapy dog, had just exposed a criminal conspiracy that had fooled an entire community. As court officers worked to restore order, District Attorney Rodriguez realized that Sophie's testimony had accomplished something unprecedented. It had not only identified 3 violent criminals, but had revealed a 4th conspirator who had been hiding in plain sight, manipulating the investigation and the community's response from the very beginning. The most shocking twist in Denver's legal history had just unfolded in the most unexpected way imaginable, and a 7-year-old girl and her golden retriever had delivered justice in a manner that would be studied in law schools and courtrooms for decades to come. David Peterson's desperate 47-second flight through the Denver County Courthouse became the most replayed news footage of the year. Security cameras captured every moment: his panicked leap from the gallery bench, his stumbling run down the marble hallway, and the spectacular tackle by bailiff Marcus Johnson that sent both men sliding across the polished lobby floor. Within minutes, the footage was broadcasting on every major news network, with legal commentators calling it the most dramatic confession in American courtroom history. In interview room 3 of the Denver Police Department, Peterson's carefully constructed facade crumbled like ancient parchment. Detective Maria Santos sat across from the grocery store manager who had fooled an entire community for 3 months, watching as his hands trembled and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. The man who had organized meal trains for the Carter family now faced charges of conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, home invasion, and attempted murder. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Peterson finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Detective Santos kept her expression neutral, though internally she marveled at how a 7-year-old girl and her therapy dog had accomplished what weeks of professional investigation had failed to achieve. "Robert Carter owed me money, serious money from a poker game that went bad. He had something worth $50,000 in that house, and he kept putting me off, saying he needed more time." The special box Sophie had mentioned turned out to be a rare coin collection that Robert Carter had inherited from his grandfather, collection he had planned to sell to pay off his gambling debt to Peterson. But Peterson's impatience and greed had driven him to recruit 3 local criminals for what was supposed to be a simple burglary that had spiraled into a nightmare of violence. Within 6 hours of Peterson's arrest, Tommy Martinez and Jake Rodriguez were also in custody, picked up at a downtown bar where they'd been celebrating what they thought was their successful escape from justice. Marcus Webb, the 3rd member of their crew, was arrested at his apartment, still wearing the same boots that matched footprints found at the Carter crime scene. The speed with which the case unraveled was unprecedented. Peterson's confession led to a treasure trove of evidence: text messages coordinating the break-in, security footage from multiple locations showing the 4 men together on the night of the attack, and physical evidence that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. The green ink on Webb's fingers came from marking playing cards. During their planning meetings, a detail Sophie's innocent observation had transformed into a crucial piece of evidence. Judge Rebecca Thompson found herself making legal history. Once again, 3 weeks later, during the sentencing hearing, the same courtroom that had witnessed Sophie's groundbreaking testimony now hosted another unprecedented moment. A victim impact statement delivered by a 7-year-old girl to her therapy dog, with the entire proceedings being broadcast live on national television. Sophie entered the courtroom wearing a bright yellow dress, a color she had chosen because it makes Zeus happy, she told her grandmother. The golden retriever wore a new collar for the occasion, a simple brown leather band with a small brass nameplate that read Zeus Hero engraved in elegant script. The collar had been a gift from the Colorado Bar Association, presented in recognition of his historic service to the justice system. This time, Sophie's voice carried clear and strong throughout the courtroom as she addressed Zeus, but her words were clearly meant for everyone present. Zeus, I want to tell the judge and everyone here about how these bad men hurt our family, she began, her small hand resting confidently on the golden retriever's head. But I also want them to know that even when scary things happen, there are always good people and good dogs who help make things better. Her impact statement was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She spoke about the nightmares that still woke her up, about missing her parents' bedtime stories during their long hospital stays, and about the fear that had gripped her community. But she also talked about the kindness of neighbors who weren't like Mr. Peterson, about the doctors and nurses who had helped her family heal, and about how Zeus had taught her that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing the right thing even when you were afraid. Zeus helped me find my voice when I thought it was lost forever, Sophie concluded, her words carrying a maturity that left many in the courtroom wiping away tears. And now I want to use that voice to make sure other kids know they can be brave too, even when bad things happen. Judge Thompson's sentencing was swift and decisive. David Peterson received 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence enhanced due to his leadership role in the conspiracy and his manipulation of the community during the investigation. Marcus Webb, Tommy Martinez, and Jake Rodriguez each received 20 years, with the possibility of parole after 15 years served. But Judge Thompson's most significant ruling came at the end of the hearing. This court hereby establishes the Sophie Carter Protocol, she announced, which will serve as a template for other jurisdictions considering the use of therapy animals in traumatic testimony cases. What we have witnessed here proves that justice can be served in ways we never imagined, and that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the smallest witnesses. The protocol would be adopted by 17 states within 6 months, making Sophie and Zeus pioneers in a revolution that would help hundreds of traumatized children find their voices in courtrooms across America. Outside the courthouse, Robert Carter, now fully recovered and walking with only a slight limp, stood with his wife Linda and daughter, facing a crowd of reporters and well-wishers. His voice was strong as he addressed the media. Our family has been through hell, but we've learned that justice can come from the most unexpected places. Sophie and Zeus didn't just help us find peace. They've created a legacy that will help other families for generations to come. Zeus, seemingly understanding the magnitude of the moment, sat perfectly still beside Sophie as photographers captured what would become an iconic image. A little girl in a yellow dress standing next to her golden guardian, both of them representing hope, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals in the service of justice. The case that had begun with silence and fear had ended with voices raised in triumph, proving that sometimes the most profound changes come from the gentlest hearts. Sophie Carter and Zeus had not only delivered justice for their family, they had transformed the American legal system forever, one whispered word at a time. 2 years after that historic courtroom testimony that changed American jurisprudence forever, Sophie Carter and Zeus had become Colorado's most celebrated duo. On a crisp October morning, exactly 24 months from the night that had shattered, her family Sophie stood confidently at the podium in the packed auditorium of Jefferson Elementary School, her hand resting on Zeus's head as she addressed 200 fourth graders who listened with rapt attention. "Sometimes grown-ups think kids can't be brave," Sophie said, her voice now clear and strong, carrying none of the whispered hesitation that had once characterized her speech. "But Zeus taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing, even when your heart is beating really fast and your hands are shaking." Zeus, now wearing his official Colorado Courthouse Therapy Team badge, wagged his tail gently as if approving of her message. The Sophie's Voice program had become a phenomenon that stretched far beyond Colorado's borders. What had started as a simple idea to help other traumatized children had evolved into a comprehensive initiative spanning 37 states, with Sophie and Zeus serving as the program's founding ambassadors. They visited schools, hospitals, and courthouses, sharing their story and inspiring countless children to find courage in the darkest moments. Dr. James Mitchell, now the program's clinical director, watched from the auditorium's back row with undisguised pride. In his folder was a stack of letters from children across America who had found their voices with the help of therapy dogs, trained using the protocols developed from Sophie and Zeus's groundbreaking work. 8-year-old Marcus from Atlanta had testified against his abuser with the help of a German shepherd named Scout. 12-year-old Maria from Phoenix had overcome selective mutism with a golden retriever named Sunshine. The ripple effects of one little girl's courage continued to spread across the nation like waves in a vast ocean. The legal profession had embraced the Sophie Carter protocol with remarkable enthusiasm. Harvard Law School now offered a specialized course called Alternative Testimony Methods in Trauma Cases, while the American Bar Association had established the Zeus Foundation, providing funding for courthouse therapy dog programs nationwide. Judge Rebecca Thompson, now serving on the Colorado Supreme Court, frequently spoke at legal conferences about the day that changed her understanding of justice forever. Sarah Williams, Zeus's handler and trainer, had opened the Colorado Canine Justice Institute, where she trained therapy dogs specifically for courthouse work. Her waiting list stretched 18 months, with requests pouring in from prosecutors, victim advocates, and judges who had witnessed the transformative power of the human-animal bond in delivering justice. Zeus had become the template for an entirely new category of service animal, and his offspring were already showing promising aptitude for similar work. The Carter family's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. Robert Carter had returned to teaching with a renewed passion for helping young people overcome adversity. His history classes now included lessons about courage and resilience that drew from his family's own experience. Linda Carter had become a national advocate for victims' rights, testifying before Congress about the importance of accommodating trauma survivors in the legal system. Their marriage, strengthened by their shared ordeal and recovery, had become a symbol of healing and hope for other families facing similar tragedies. But it was Sophie herself who had undergone the most remarkable transformation. The quiet, traumatized child who had once communicated only through whispers to her therapy dog had blossomed into a confident young speaker who could captivate audiences of hundreds. Her book, Finding My Voice with Zeus, co-authored with child psychologist Dr. Mitchell, had become a bestseller and was being adapted into a family film starring some of Hollywood's most respected actors. On this particular morning, as Sophie concluded her presentation to the Jefferson Elementary students, a small hand shot up from the third row. "Sophie, asked a boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. "What do you do when you're still scared, even after you've been brave?" Sophie looked down at Zeus, who had been her constant companion through every triumph and setback of the past 2 years. The golden retriever's gentle brown eyes seemed to encourage her, just as they had on that first terrifying day in the therapy room. "You know what, Tommy?" Sophie replied, having caught the boy's name from his earlier introduction. "I still get scared sometimes. But Zeus taught me that being scared is okay. It means you care about something important. And when you have a good friend beside you, whether it's a person or a dog, or even just a really special stuffed animal, you can be scared and brave at the same time." The auditorium erupted in applause, but Sophie wasn't finished. "The most important thing Zeus taught me is that your voice matters. Even if you're small, even if you're scared, even if grown-ups sometimes don't listen the first time, your voice can change the world. You just have to be brave enough to use it." After the presentation, as Sophie and Zeus made their way through the crowd of excited children who wanted to pet the famous golden retriever, she was approached by Mrs. Jennifer Walsh, now District Attorney Walsh, who had been promoted largely due to her skillful handling of the Carter case. "Sophie," the Walsh said with a warm smile, "the governor wants to present you and Zeus with the Colorado Medal of Courage next month. You'll be the youngest recipient in state history." Sophie's face lit up with excitement, but then she grew thoughtful. "Will there be other kids there? Kids who might need to hear about being brave?" When Dow Walsh nodded, Sophie grinned. "Then Zeus and I would be honored to accept." As they left Jefferson Elementary that afternoon, Sophie walked alongside Zeus through the same neighborhood where her nightmare had begun 2 years earlier. But now, instead of fear, the streets held memories of community support, healing, and triumph. Neighbors waved from their porches, children called out greetings to Zeus, and the world felt safe again. "You know what, Zeus?" Sophie said as they reached their front door, where her parents waited with warm hugs and proud smiles. "I think we did something pretty amazing together. We helped show the world that even the smallest voices can make the biggest difference when they have the right friend beside them." Zeus responded with his signature gentle huff and a tail wag that seemed to say he couldn't agree more. Together, they had transformed tragedy into triumph, silence into strength, and fear into a force for justice that would echo through American courtrooms for generations to come. The little girl who had once whispered her secrets to a golden retriever had found her voice, and in doing so, had given voice to countless others who needed to believe that their stories mattered, their courage counted, and their truth could set them free.